Welcome to Alaska Weather, a production of Alaska Public Media and the National Weather Service, Alaska Region. Produced and broadcast daily from the studios of KAKM, Alaska Weather provides complete forecasts, public, marine, and aviation for all of Alaska. Alaska Weather is made possible by the following sponsors.
The National Weather Service.
Good Monday, everyone. I'm meteorologist Dave Snider with the National Weather Service. It's the 27th of July. As always, we encourage you to stay up to date with your local weather information for your community and village, and you can do that by going to weather.gov/Alaska or arh.noaa.gov online. The weather info line is always open at 800-472-0391, and during the day and when the weather is changing, you can find us on social media at Facebook at NWS Alaska, on Twitter also at NWS Alaska and NWS Fairbanks, NWS Anchorage, or NWS Juneau, and using the hashtag AKwx, or if you'd like to tag us that way, on Instagram as well, we can find information that you want to share about the weather situation where you are, and that helps us do a better job communicating what else is coming your way so we can keep you ahead of the storm. On YouTube, you can find us at NWS Alaska, and after this broadcast, if you look for Alaska Weather or AKwx TV, you'll find this complete broadcast later on in the evening. Let's talk about what's going on right now and what's to come. There is an awful lot of moisture hanging up above our heads right now. If you've seen the clouds, they're fairly dark in many parts of central and southern parts of Alaska, and certainly in southeast as well. And when it rains, because of the amount of moisture that's in the air, sometimes those rain showers can be a little bit heavier than normal. As is the case right now across the central and eastern parts of the Alaska range, when it is raining, it may come down pretty hard and fast and then take a break for a little while. But in those places where we have smaller streams and valleys that can't handle that excessive amount of rain in short order, we have what we're calling small stream flood advisories. So the bigger watersheds will be fine. The Matanuska and the Susitna Valley, not expecting any problems like that, or heading northward into the Tanana, we don't expect issues there. However, you may see, if you're hiking around in the mountains in the afternoon or the evening and a shower develops, it could come down pretty quick and bring up that water level in that smaller stream fairly quickly because it just can't handle that amount of water in short order. So until early tomorrow afternoon, at least for right now, a small stream flood advisory is posted around the Denali area. So if you've got plans to go up to Denali and do some hiking, that will include the park, as well as the eastern Alaska range and some of the passes there. If you're going berry picking, now would be a good time to review your safety plan and know your surroundings and what you're up against if you're leaving the car and walking away from the road for a while. Be mindful of the weather, and be mindful of where you are, and be mindful of what could be coming your way in the next 24 to 48 hours if you have to spend that time out of doors. So again, a small stream flood advisory until tomorrow afternoon for the Denali area and the eastern Alaska range. Now, fire danger, we're still talking about that, as well as areas south of the Brooks Range and up into the Noatak and Kobuk Valleys and points east. We're still watching for some slightly higher and maybe even extreme levels of dryness and fire danger right now. But you can see over the course of the last several weeks, the fire danger has subsided substantially across southwestern Alaska, across south central. And we're still watching for elevated and high fire danger levels across parts of the Copper River Basin and the eastern Alaska range. You'll also recall just moments ago we drew in that small stream flood advisory right there across the eastern Alaska range. So of course any rain in these areas here will certainly help to abate that, at least somewhat, so we can be hopeful in that regard. Southeast, no major issues there for fire danger, but you are getting in on the wet weather. The wet weather pattern has been bringing weather disturbances out across the Bering Sea from eastern Asia, crossing the Gulf of Alaska and picking up some very rich and moist air from the tropical Pacific. Some of that is cast off from former typhoons, some of which you may have seen about in the news around the central and western Pacific there. We're not getting that actual storm itself. We are getting the moisture that it has gathered up, and some of that is meeting up with disturbances that are moving across the Alaska waters. As those move into southeastern Alaska, it's wringing that water out, and places like Yakutat really picked up a good soaker today. 2.4 inches of rain. Well, of course, it's one of the wettest places on the planet, so not a big surprise that it rained quite a bit there. But again, compared to a normal day anywhere else in Alaska, that is a super soaker kind of day. Sitka saw about 1.5 inches of rain. The areas around St. Paul picked up about 0.2 earlier today as some of the cloud cover worked over there. That was probably a pretty heavy drizzle or perhaps even a light rainfall during the day. Cordova saw about 1/3 of an inch. Juneau saw about 1/2 inch of rainfall. Annette, also usually a wet spot, picked up about 1/2 inch of rainfall today. And many other locations in southeast and south central had their fair share during the early morning hours and again during the daytime today. So as we look out toward the north and west with a visible satellite picture, you can see the clouds were breaking up today. A lot of low cloud cover early in the morning, a lot of dense fog and areas of low stratus across most of the southwestern coast and the southern and central Bering Sea. Low pressure sitting right over the Gulf of Alaska, and as it's drawing air off of the continent, and that's breaking up some of the clouds across Cook Inlet as well as Shelikof Strait and south of Kodiak Island towards Sand Point. Many other areas, though, are seeing the opposite effect. We're seeing that warm and wet air push northward and into several areas of disturbed weather of low pressure across the upper Yukon Valley. And that, in turn, is allowing the cloud cover to form and increase and bubble up and turn into rainfall and turn into at least isolated, maybe even widely scattered thunderstorms across some parts of the middle and upper Yukon Valley earlier this afternoon. That trend will continue as we head through the evening hours tonight. You can see that the bulk of that bubbly or ripply kind of pattern on the satellite picture has forced its way into the Yukon as well as the central and eastern interior. On the westward side of that, though, we're getting that drier and cooler air. What you're not picking up, unfortunately, in the satellite scan is the northerly winds that have pushed in low clouds and stratus across the north slope. And a lot of that is going to stay put for the coming days for many parts of the north slope, and Barrow included, as well as areas of light drizzle or perhaps even some light rainfall as we go into the Tuesday and again on Wednesday. Today's weather includes low pressure dropping southward across the north slope already. You can see some of that low cloud cover across the coastal plain there. We also saw a widely scattering of showers and thunderstorms, a lot of that across the central interior, some of that working its way into places as far north as Old Crow and into the Yukon. Low pressure sitting across the eastern Gulf at 1,006 millibars was pushing that warm and wet air into southeastern Alaska. Again, some of that fairly heavy today, including Yakutat, again at 2.4 inches of rain. Fog and stratus across the central and western Bering Sea. We've got a frontal boundary draped out across the North Pacific that's actually connected to the disturbance you see in the eastern Gulf. So everything's got a part to play, and it stretches all the way across the Pacific there. As we go into tonight, watch for periods of rainfall and showers across south central, across southwest, and especially across the central and eastern interior. In this area here, we'll probably expect a little bit more of a widespread area of rainfall, and some of that again could be heavy. Remembering what we were talking about with the eastern Alaska Range and the Denali area, periods of rainfall there, once they develop, certainly could be heavy at times. Maybe not all the time, but if it does come down fairly quickly, be prepared for what could result there as far as brief and excessive runoff there. Maybe not a complete flash flood situation, but something that will bring up those smaller stream levels fairly quickly. Across southeast, a west and southwesterly onshore flow will continue for your area, and of course that means more clouds and more rainfall. The winds don't look to be terribly excessive, but there could be an occasional gust or two as some of the pressure levels are climbing there just a bit. Look for showers south of Nunivak Island and across the southern tip of the Alaska Peninsula, as well as the central and eastern chain, with high pressure out to the west of Shemya, though. It looks like more of what you'll be dealing with would be perhaps a drizzle or just some areas of dense or perhaps occasional fog. Tuesday's forecast shows low pressure sitting north of the Alaska Range and right across the Yukon Valley. Once again, showers and thunderstorms are expected to develop in the afternoon. They probably won't be terribly widespread in south central or southwestern Alaska, but the focus will likely be in the central and the east. Southeast is looking at another wet day with onshore flow continuing, and once again periods of occasional heavy rainfall should be expected there. A trough of low pressure will sit right across the Alaska Range and try and drift eastward. That's connected to the circulation across the interior. High pressure across the northern part of Yukon and the Northwest Territories at 1,013 millibars isn't terribly strong, but it is feeding an east and northeasterly wind across the coastal plain and still locking in a lot of that low cloud cover. And high pressure still sitting across the central and western chain at 1,023 millibars. And that pretty much falls apart as we get into Wednesday and makes way for low pressure working out of the North Pacific to get a lot closer to the central and western chain. That's at about 1,009 millibars. And with that frontal boundary working north, we'll have a much better chance of actually stirring up the cloud cover, maybe breaking up some of the fog and stratus, but Also working with that high moisture rich content in the atmosphere and wringing out some moderate rainfall across the central and west, maybe even some occasional heavy rainfall for places like Adak, Atka, Shemya, and Attu area. Across the central and western parts of the Gulf, we're still looking at some showers across south central, Kodiak Island, points west, probably a better chance of rainfall up against the Alaska Range. Maybe a few showers and thunderstorms, mainly in the mountains there and generally north up and down the Alcan. For southeast, it's a steady rainfall for you with high pressure south closer to the Pacific Northwest. And then we get a little bit of a break as some drier air works in behind that, perhaps into late week, but we'll have to see how that trend continues and if we're still attached to some of that very high moisture content air that's being pumped into the Gulf of Alaska at this point. Here's a look at temperatures today. Across southeast, we saw readings back in the mid to upper 50s. So while it was wet, it wasn't terribly cool for many. Lower 60s there just south of the Dixon entrance around Juneau and out towards Sitka, mid to upper 50s there. 57 in Yakutat around Prince William Sound. We saw highs in the lower 60s, 63 by late afternoon in Anchorage. It was actually a little bit warmer earlier in the day, 62 in Homer. 64 around Talkeetna, a little bit further up the road. Temperatures cooled off into the upper 50s there. 51 around Healy, 63 around Fort Greely, and about 61 in Fairbanks. Lower 60s for Eagle with Northway at 66. 59 was the temperature in Fort Yukon around the 3 o'clock hour. Anaktuvuk Pass was 50 degrees. 30s and 40s for the Arctic coast. Barrow didn't really get terribly warm today thanks to the clouds, only 36 degrees there. 50s and 60s around the Kotzebue Sound region. 45 around Tin City. 54 out around Gamble and Savunga. 74 for Ruby, 69 in Galena this afternoon. It was 62 in McGrath with temperatures out around Bethel only in the mid 50s there, so a little bit cooler again on the western side of that low pressure system working eastward. Around Bristol Bay, we saw temperatures peaking in the lower to mid 60s for Dillingham and King Salmon with 60 in Kodiak. 40s and 50s for St. Paul and St. George this afternoon. Again, also that was with rainfall, so not too terribly cool. 40s and 50s for the Alaska Peninsula. Sandpoint was showing 59. Cold Bay and False Pass also in the lower 40s with 53 in Dutch Harbor, Unalaska, and 48 at Attu, Adak, and Atka were both 54. Now, overnight low temperatures will stay mild in the interior, lower to mid 50s for many there, especially from Fairbanks westward. Southwest, we're looking at temps closer to 50 degrees, including Bristol Bay. Southeast, lower to mid 50s for you. 53 in Kodiak. The Aleutians will be in the upper 40s to about 50 degrees in the north slope. Lower to mid 50s, not expecting anyone to go below freezing, but it will be a cooler night. And south central, we expect low temperatures closer to 50 degrees. High temps tomorrow back in the mid to upper 60s for many in south central. Southwest, a little bit cooler than that, upper 50s for the chain and most of the Alaska Peninsula. Most in southeast will not make it to 60 degrees tomorrow, but it will be close. The north slope in the mid to upper 30s. Some areas in the higher terrain probably in the mid 40s as you get away from some of that low-level coastal cool air. 61 in Nome, Kotzebue Sound, lower 60s for you. And Fairbanks, you're looking at about 68 for your Tuesday. Flying weather includes IFR conditions for most of the coastal areas in the north and the west and the chain. You see some improvements as you get into south central as a little bit of drier air is making it into the system, but for southeast MVFR conditions and cloudy, cool, and wet weather should continue for your region with showers and thunderstorms, mainly again focusing on the mountains. Here's your pass conditions then. Anaktuvuk and Adigan Pass are expected to be VFR. Now areas to the north may see some restrictions, but the passes themselves right now look to be okay. Lake Clark and Merrill Pass, we expect to see gradual improvements during your Tuesday there, watching for mountain showers and thunderstorms to develop during the day. Rainy Pass, expect that to start out at MVFR, transitioning toward improving weather, and the same goes for Windy Pass. Watch for mountain showers and storms in that vicinity. Isabel Pass, we expect to see some restrictions generally in the morning. They should be marginal with some improvements during the afternoon. Mentasta Pass looks to be mainly VFR for your Tuesday. And Tanita Pass, we expect to see visual flight rule by the afternoon. Showers and thunderstorms could develop in the afternoon there, and the same goes for the Portage region. Generally north of that is where we would expect most of any thunderstorm activity to form. But watch for some marginal restrictions, especially on the eastern side. Otherwise, VFR is smooth sailing through there. And Chilkoot and White Pass at this point we're going to call MVFR for your Tuesday. Our freezing levels still indicate a considerable amount of warm air, especially across areas in the west, with freezing levels between 12 and 14,000 feet across the western Bering and the North Pacific. But you can see a pool of cooler air across the northern Gulf, and certainly that cooler air dropping southward across the coastal plain in the north. And Barrow, we're looking at levels as low as 4,000 feet. Icing potential is pretty high up there, though. We have a lot of warm air in place, and because of that, we don't see any risk generally below 10,000 feet for parts of the northern and eastern Gulf, but you do see occasional moderate above that. The same goes for areas south of Kodiak Island and the peninsula, generally above 10,000 feet, and west of St. Lawrence Island, also above 10,000 feet. Some of that could reach light to isolated moderate. The jet stream shows our trough of low pressure connecting the Arctic pattern all the way down to the North Pacific, and that is bringing some cooler, drier weather into the northern Bering Sea. However, this is latching onto the Pacific moisture and pushing that right into southeastern Alaska. Wind speeds not terribly fast, anywhere from 65 to 80 knots. At 9,000 feet, you can see that trough sitting right across central and eastern parts of Alaska. Westerly winds there across the Gulf from 25 to 30 knots. Southwesterlies moving into southeastern Alaska at 20 to 25 knots, and otherwise light winds across the mainland. Similar story here for 3,000 feet. Northeasterlies are light coming in across the Bering Strait and the northwestern coast, only 10 knots or so. Westerlies crossing the Gulf at 20 to 25 knots, and a little bit of a stronger flow coming into the Panhandle. Otherwise, light winds across the interior. So turbulence is pretty much not a huge issue right now. Below 5,000 feet across the Bering Strait and a very thin strip north of Nunivak Island. A developing area of turbulence south and west of the western chain, and a remaining area of turbulence just south of the Dixon entrance over the Queen Charlottes and around Haida Gwaii. Most of that just light to isolated moderate. That's a look at your aviation forecast. I'll be back with your marine weather here in just a few minutes. Stay tuned.
Good evening. I'm Harry Keeling, and on behalf of Alaska Public Media and the Alaskan Aviation Safety Foundation, welcome to Hangar Flying. Tonight we've got Kerry Long back on. Kerry is the FAA Regional Administrator for Alaska, and he's been in the job a little over a year. Last time, if you tuned in, he talked about some of the improvements that the FAA has continued to install and some of the technology that around the state that has made aviation safer. Tonight we're going to talk a little bit about what I feel is his personal and deeply felt concern for aviation safety. Kerry, welcome back.
Thank you, Harry.
You've been here a little over a year, and I suspect from having talked at length with you, and one of your great disappointments, and mine as well, has been the frustratingly elusive goal of reducing or eliminating the fatal and serious injury accidents, the FSI. We had a conversation recently I can only describe as it was depressing. I can remember having a conversation with you last year about the end of the fiscal year, and the FSI was the lowest it's ever been since you've been keeping records. And you and I you were, I think, in my office, and we said, wow, yep. 8 accidents, 10 fatalities. When compared to the year before 2013, we had 21 FSIs and 33 fatalities. The problem is I find ourselves on a roller coaster. A month, 6 weeks ago, 2 months ago, we were looking great. We were under the wire. And now in the past month, we've had 4 accidents, I think it was 4, with fatalities in less than a month. What should we be doing that we're not?
Well, Harry, I don't know that a regulator has ever said this, but I have more questions than answers about that. It's easy to say it's an art, not a science. It involves cutting across generations, although frankly I'm not sure there are necessarily generational issues with some of these recent accidents. There's some kind of one-off strange things that I'm not sure a regulator can ever do, but we've tried to reach a bit beyond that with, for example, your organization and the Millennium folks to try and get people to aspire and maintain a higher level of safety than a regulator requires. And the problem is we've gotten it down pretty close. Any fatal or serious injury is one too many, but we spend our efforts, and this is an organization with a mission, and the mission is aviation safety, to try and reduce the number of accidents overall, but particularly FSIs. And my theory is it's nice to have people come home at night and be with their family for dinner. It's getting people home, getting the villages taken care of. I think you've spoken to the issues about getting back to basics. We have to get back to basics and make sure that the folks that we're trying to get back to the basics know what we're talking about, and that we're stressing the right issues to them so that they understand that we know what they need, we sympathize to their needs, with their needs, and we're meeting their needs. And I'm speaking in generalities because there are so many ways we can attack this. The safety seminars you do, and you have another one coming up shortly, those things are fabulous. But what we have to do is get the people that don't come, that are flying airplanes, or heaven help us, the kids, the young folks who want to fly, that we aren't inspiring to fly or to fly safely. And that is an age-old challenge that I will assure you that I'm up here for one reason, and that's to make sure that we make progress. We can't stop it because of all of the decision-making made by people, folks out there, some very experienced pilots who do some very things that are not particularly advisable that may cost them their lives. We had a prop strike recently, for example. When I stop taking this personally is when it's time for me to go. But I have, and I understand you've got some things you want to express, and I'd love to hear them.
Well, thank you for those thoughtful words. I want to have you back on the program, maybe maybe in a couple months. I want to talk about this concept you have of influencers, and also some of the research and studies that you've looked at on the generational issue. I think that's fascinating. I'd like to maybe get you back in a couple of months and talk and have a couple of sessions on that.
Be delighted.
Ladies and gentlemen, I'm going to depart a little bit from an approach I've used before. I was recently interviewed on another channel, and they asked me, "Are we making progress?" And I said, "I don't know. It's disappointing because it is this roller coaster. We have these accidents. The NTSB does a tremendously professional job of looking into them, but it usually takes a year, sometimes 2 years, to come out with a final report. And that's the way it should be, because you can't jump to conclusions. But I'm going to share a couple of thoughts with you, because I don't want to wait that long to get these words out. This is nothing magic, but I want to tell you this. Here's a couple things to keep in mind, and you can tie them to the accidents that we had this summer if you want. If the engine is running, someone needs to be in the pilot's seat. 2, if you don't have situational awareness and clear aggressively, you may someday have a midair. 3, if you are on a VFR flight plan, don't fly in the clouds, ever. And 4, don't fly low over crowds of people, particularly family and friends. Kerry, thanks for being on the program tonight.
Thank you, Harry.
Ladies and gentlemen, fly safe.
Always good reminders. Thank you, Harry. Here's a look at the marine forecast for tomorrow in southeast. Winds are going to be fairly light, but it's that gentle onshore and very wet flow that will bring more rain to the region. Winds should not be horribly gusty, but watch for a few isolated stronger gusts to develop if the pressure pattern changes just a little bit. 15-knot wind in just about all areas there from the south and southeast across the inner and outer coast. Southwesterly flow there across the outer coast. Around 7-foot seas are expected there. Southerly flow coming into Yakutat, also light at around 10 knots by Wednesday. Just very subtle shifts in the pattern. Mostly the same for the inner waterways. A 15-knot wind with a 3-foot sea. Otherwise, a southwesterly flow coming ashore around 10 to 15 knots with 5 to as high as 7-foot seas on Wednesday and southeast. For south central, a light and variable flow will be the dominant pattern for tomorrow and for Wednesday. Look for winds around 10 to 15 knots tops. For areas west of the Barrens, more of a westerly flow there with a 3-foot sea. Also looking for light and westerly winds just east of Kodiak, a southwesterly flow up to 15 knots in Chillicothe Strait. Otherwise, 3 to 4-foot seas on the outside in the north and western Gulf. Maybe a few areas east of the Barrens up to 5-foot seas. For Wednesday, really not much of a change, more of a southeasterly flow coming into Kodiak Island, but most areas, again, very light and somewhat variable flow with 2 to 4-foot seas in all areas there, including Cook Inlet, Prince William Sound, and the north and western Gulf for Wednesday. For the Alaska Peninsula, a gentle westerly breeze coming in at 15 knots with 4-foot seas there. 15-knot winds there south of the peninsula from Kodiak Island all the way out toward King Cove. You're looking at about 5-foot seas. Northerlies coming into the southern tip of the Alaska Peninsula on the Bering Sea coast side. You're looking at 5-foot seas there, and seas diminish even more to 3 feet as we get into Wednesday with a variable flow from areas from the Bering Sea all the way out toward the southern tip of Kodiak Island. Southwesterlies remain light inside of Bristol Bay and more of a variable flow heading down the Pacific coast toward King Cove with a 4-foot sea there. Across the Aleutians, north and westerly winds running around 10 to 15 knots. A little bit more of a variable flow west of Kiska to Shemya. You're looking at 4 to 5 foot seas in the Pacific, 5 to 6 foot seas on the Bering Sea coast side as we get into Wednesday. A little bit of an increase in the winds from AKwx toward Shemya. East and northeast winds around 20 to 25 knots at tops, 4 to 7 foot seas there, and otherwise a variable flow up to 15 knots south of Unalaska and Nikolsky with that northeasterly wind bringing in 4 foot seas. Across the west coast, north and westerly winds from Gamble and Savunga all the way down to Nunivak Island and the Kuskokwim Bay region, 15 to 20 knots with 4 to 5 foot seas. Variable winds around St. Matthew and the Pribilofs, 10 knot winds expected there for Tuesday. That stays about the same for Wednesday with 3 to 4 foot seas. Otherwise, northerlies crossing St. Lawrence Island with a 5 foot sea and 3 foot seas by the time you get to the upper Kuskokwim Bay. Now, as you get across the north slope, winds will also remain fairly light and about the same as we get into Wednesday. 10-knot winds across the Beaufort Seacoast, still looking at ice north of Prudhoe Bay and Dead Horse. North and northeasterly winds coming down the Chukchi Seacoast, 15 to 25 knots there, 20 knots outside of Kotzebue Sound. Well, things stay about the same for Wednesday, really, looking for very small seas north of Kaktovik. 2, 3, and even 4 foot seas as you get down the Chukchi Seacoast, and some of that ice may advance a little bit further south before lifting northward again later in the week. Northerlies inside and outside of Kotzebue Sound, 20 knots there with a 5 foot sea. That's a look at your marine weather. Recapping tonight, we have very wet air across most of Alaska right now, especially across the central and southern interior and southeastern Alaska. So as the disturbances work over our state, when it starts to rain, there's a possibility it's going to rain heavily, at least for a short amount of time. And for places around Denali and the eastern Alaska Range, that could bring up the level of small streams fairly quickly, perhaps very much like a flash flood. So if you've got hiking plans, blueberry picking plans, going out to do some hunting or just some fishing, it's a good idea to be aware of your surroundings and know how to get to higher ground in case some of those rain events come up fairly quickly. Watch for a better chance of thunderstorms across the central and eastern interior tomorrow and again on Wednesday. Thanks for watching Alaska Weather. We'll see you right here again tomorrow.
These forecasts are to be used for planning purposes only. Call 1-800-WX-BRIEF for a formal pre-flight briefing. Always file a flight plan before you go flying. The U.S. Coast Guard Auxiliary urges you to leave a float plan with a friend or the harbor master before you go boating. Alaska Weather is made possible by the following sponsors.
The National Weather Service.